Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and we are all in for a very special treat in today's episode because I am joined not by one great guest, but by two great guests, two incredible people doing super powerful and meaningful work that's going to inspire all of us to think even bigger than we already are, which for us as entrepreneurs, that is what we're always striving for. So I want to tell you about today's two guests. Their names are Virginia and Justin. So Virginia Lacayo is driven by the belief that is easy to colonize an unchallenged mind, which is why she's the co-founder and CEO of Massive, a coaching practice that guides and equips business leaders called to use their status and power to take on systemic change. Dr. Lacayo is a certified mindset coach, a thought leader in the field of communication for social and organizational change, a complexity scientist, and a systemic leadership expert. She is partnered up with the incredible Justin Foster, who Justin is a fellow linguist. The copy on their website is some of the best stuff I've ever seen. I'm actually going to include that in my bio that I'm reading for you guys here today. But to tell you a little bit about Justin, Justin Foster believes that love never looks away. After many years as a brand coach, this belief inspired him to co-found Massive, which, as I already talked about, supports business leaders who are called to use their status to take on that systemic change. Besides the business poetry of messaging, which I'm going to share some of that, a real life example in just a second, Justin's love for language extends beyond the business world as a poet, essayist, songwriter, and is the published author of 4 books. And before I jump into today's episode, you know how much I love jumping straight in. I'm going to read the Who We Are section from Virginia and Justin's website. Here's what they wrote under Who We Are. On the surface, a Latina social change expert and mindset coach with a Ph.D. and a highly conscious cowboy poet who knows a little bit about branding seems like an unlikely pairing. But what unifies very different backgrounds, experiences, and skills is a shared lifelong calling to provoke and question power dynamics. And I think that's the best way to lead me into today's interview. I'm so excited to dive in with Virginia Lacayo and Justin Foster. Virginia and Justin, officially welcome to the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thank you, Brian.
Heck yeah. So obviously that was quite the intro. I was very excited to do that intro today because I've done so much work and I love so much about what you guys stand for. But before we dive into all the good big questions that we're going to be asking today, tell us how the heck we got here. Who's Virginia? Who's Justin?
Well, I was born in France, grew up in Nicaragua. I consider myself a Latina and therefore an immigrant here. And I have always wanted to understand how we as humans behave and change, especially at the collective level. I've been an activist my whole life. I really believe in social justice, and I believe in the possibility of changing the wrong in our society by changing the systems that rule our society. So that's why I became a passionate student of complex adaptive systems and systemic leadership, and also how our mind is really the one ruling and becoming the executor of most oppressive systems that we have. So I wanted to, and I learned how to master the mind, your own mind, so you can really understand and challenge all the socializing tactics and colonizing tactics and gaslighting tactics that oppressive systems have used to keep us where we are, and how to change it.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I grew up, I have a very different background, is that I grew up on a cattle ranch in Eastern Oregon and was part of a fundamentalist, I wouldn't call it a cult, but a certainly cult-like Christian organization, and I grew up in a very traumatic, like violent home. And most of my life was escaping that to try to find out who I really was. And, you know, when you're young, and especially if you grow up in violence, you just sort of adopt identities that help you survive and get ahead. And in 2014, I had an awakening. And part of that awakening ended up being moving to Austin. It ended up being like, it got all the way to this point, right before I met Virginia, where I realized that these gifts that I have, these gifts as a linguist, and even my trauma background and my religious background, these were all equipping me to do something more than just help, software companies come up with slogans. And we met, Virginia and I met in December of 2020. We're partners in real life, not just in business. And a couple years into the relationship, realized how much we had in common related to social justice and systemic change, arriving at it at wildly and radically different ways. I would have classified myself as a conservative Christian or right-wing Christian back in the day. And so everybody thinks I've gone woke, and actually what I've done is just woken up, which is very different than going woke.
Yeah, and what I think is fascinating, I love both of you sharing your individual backgrounds. There's so much that I can relate to in so many pieces of it. Virginia, for you especially, so I'm the son of an immigrant mom, and that is so at the core of my beliefs surrounding not just life, but also entrepreneurship. I think that entrepreneurship is the vehicle for so much change in society, in the entire world. And that's why it's so fascinating to me to hear both of your backgrounds. And Justin, you're right. I can clearly see the differences and the contrast in your backgrounds. But what's very evident to me looking in is that both of you believe in the power. Where do these all intersect? In the power of entrepreneurship to affect and impact that change. Talk to us about how all of this stuff, talking about, in today's climate especially, we talk about systemic change. We talk about change in a lot of different ways, but you guys both see entrepreneurship and business as one such vehicle to enact that change. Talk about that for us.
In many ways, we believe that entrepreneurship is really the hope of our future, because I work for this nonprofit, for the, the NGOs and nonprofit field for many, many decades. And I work with the UN, and I work with many big foundations, and I work for, help some governments, the good ones, to design strategies for social change. The problem with these fields, both non-profit fields and the public sector, is that they have their hands tied up by politics and by finances. So the nonprofit sector has great vision, great ideas. They see how the system need to change, but they are dependent on the money that governments and the corporate sector and private foundations can provide. And they're usually conditioned. They usually have an agenda. So this sector doesn't have the freedom to really exploit and take to reality their vision. On the other hand, the public sector is also tied up. It has a lot of politics. It has a lot of agendas that have to be in place. So they don't have the freedom of movement that the corporate sector has. Entrepreneurs have both freedoms. They have the power, meaning the resource, the influence, the brand they decided to have. They can implement their vision, and they have the autonomy of providing their own resource to make that happen. That is a privileged position for entrepreneurs to actually use that power to create systemic change.
Virginia, right away, I was just like, ooh, you just said something that I want to totally echo. And I want every listener in the entire world, I want every entrepreneur to hear it, which is we are uniquely positioned as entrepreneurs to affect the change that politics cannot. And it's so easy in today's climate to lean on politics and to hope, really. It's hope, which is not always the most reliable mechanism to change, but to hope that they can impact the change. But the reality is we are uniquely in the position for that. And so this is kind of a big question. I'm super curious the way that you both take this to answer it. But, for all the CEOs out there of big businesses, of all the smaller entrepreneurs who are growing their businesses and they're thinking, gosh, I'm trying to make a profit. I'm trying to grow my business. I'm trying to keep employing all my employees who have families, who have responsibilities in their life. How the heck do you also help me do positive social change? Where does that factor into our growth trajectories and also our resource? Just look up time as a resource. How do we do all of these things in one go?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian, because it's a common one that we get, and it's a reasonable question to ask. First of all, that we're not saying you have to go be a pirate or a monk to create systemic change. Is that if you're an entrepreneur with a calling, and that's the key. If you don't have the calling, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean you shouldn't go do social good, but calling is a critical part of this. But just on pure business terms, a couple of factors here to consider. One is that market pressure and social pressure are the same thing now. And so what the market wants is they want more diversity, equity, and inclusion. They want better, more sustainable environmental policies. They want a more fairness of family time and more balance. And that's the market pressure and the social pressure being the same thing. The second part of this is if you run your business with the people first, the people in mind, meaning your customers, your employees, your vendors, your partners, your investors, the market will take care of you. There is an inherent good, and John Mackey talks about this a lot, the founder of Whole Foods. There's an inherent good in consciousness-based capitalism that everyone around benefits when it's from that place. It doesn't have to be exploitative. That's an optional thing.
And I will add something more on the personal side to that too. We live in a dichotomous world. I mean, we believe that things should be white or black or either or, when actually it can be both and. And it's many people get to the point in life when they think, I didn't have the opportunity to fulfill my dreams because I was too busy making money and making a living. When it's not either or. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can make profits. Actually, coming from the nonprofit sector, imagine, I changed my mindset about money and I said, we want to make a lot of money, especially those that have an awakening, those that have a level of consciousness that want to do something. We need the power, we need the resource, we want to make money. So we want to encourage every entrepreneur that wants to make an impact to really think about how to make a lot of money and raise power and build a very strong brand and amplify their sphere of influence to make that change happen. And at the same time, to have a fulfilled life, to really listen to their heart and listen and answer to their calling. Because it's not either or, you can have both. And what we do is to help entrepreneurs to actually have both from the beginning. So it's not like when I get rich, when I have money, then I'm going to give something aside. I'm going to give to charity. I'm going to build a foundation. I'm going to contribute. I'm going to be altruistic. That's not the way. That's the way we have done it so far. And it's not really that effective. We, from the nonprofit field, I appreciate and I think is needed that we contribute with money to what nonprofit organizations are trying to do, because that's not always profitable. But it's not either or. We can contribute and also fulfill our own calling and answer to our calling and do what we think is best for humanity with our own reasons, with our life, with our time, with our business.
And I think that you also look at least in the United States, this is an observation only applies to U.S. companies, is that in the last, say, 15 years, your major social advances related to the environment, related to LGBTQ rights, related to systemic injustice, those type of social issues and social maladies, they have been addressed by and large almost exclusively by business first, where the businesses make the change and the government has to change the policy at that point to match what the businesses are doing. That shows how profound the power is when you don't have to operate within the constraints of politics and partisanship, and you can actually go out and change the world. And it doesn't even mean that you need to have some great calling, like you want to end global warming or whatever. It could be that your calling is that you just want to run a company that's a home for people to be themselves. And in that goodness of that idea, innovation springs forward and healing happens and communities grow. And it's not utopia. We're still humans with the dark side. But that intention to just do what feels right from your soul in your business, if you listen to that calling and you make the changes and you organize, what we help our clients do is organize their business around their mission, not their business model. If you do that work, profound things begin to happen economically and systemically and in the social impact that you wanted to make all along.
Boom. That right there is such a powerful answer for so many different reasons. And I know that listeners are going to be like me and get chills just hearing both of you talk about this stuff, because there's two things that I really want to call out that both of you just said, which, Virginia, I love the concept of and. We always do think about things. Well, I could have this or this, but like, why not also have the and, which I'm going to get to in my next question, because Virginia, you got my mind going a million miles a minute here, and I'm so excited to dive into that. And it reminds me of the notion you talking about growing your business so that you can have more resources to make even more change. It's like you can't pour from an empty cup. The more filled that your cup is, the more goodness you can share with others. So I love that perspective. And Justin, you gave us a real life example, which I love, which is Whole Foods. I thought about it as you were talking about it, where we don't even realize all the time as customers, as consumers, how good it is for us that our businesses are mission driven. When I think about Whole Foods, for example, it's the one grocery store where when I walk into it, I don't have to be like, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Because they are that mission driven. And that's why so many of us shop there, because we know that that's their mission, which means they're doing the homework for us. It's a brand that we can further trust, and we can more safely and happily and healthily, in Whole Foods' case, spend our money there. So I love those real life examples. And Virginia, I want to come back to the notion of the and asking ourselves these questions through that different lens, because it also ties in with your business name, Massive. And somewhere along the road in my 20s, I realized that the bigger questions we ask, the bigger answers we get. And conversely, you ask small questions, you'll get small answers. And it starts with that. If I ask myself, how can I have this and this, I will find a way. I will find a way to answer that question. Talk to me about that, because so much of your work is about those big audacious goals, those big missions, those big, I love how you both use the word callings. And talk to us about asking those right big questions to get those bigger outcomes.
Well, I believe that the best leader is not the one who has all the answers, is the one who asks the best questions. So it's to understand that our challenge is really to develop what I call an indomable mindset. That's the ultimate goal, I think, for humankind, is to master our mind, to develop that indomable mindset that allows us not only to be a skeptic of what, the news, information, what other people say or do, but also to go a little bit further and be a skeptic of what the systems are trying to make us believe, how the systems are trying to make us think small, and not asking those questions, and not be brave, and not be challenging. But then going further than that and ask ourselves how our minds are keeping us thinking small. And what kind of questions, and that's the power of coaching, and especially mindset coaching, is to challenge ourselves to ask the kind of questions that make things possible. And so instead, for instance, in the example that I was telling you before, the either or, instead of asking, well, what should I choose? Is what do I start with? And then what's following? That kind of questions will keep us in the same path that we are right now. But if we ask our brain, and the beauty of our brain is that it cannot go without answering any question. It's the ego, is the way the brain works, is it really needs to find answers. So if you challenge it by asking the right questions, powerful questions, it will find the answer for you. So questions like, how can I make a lot of profit and fulfill my life and my calling and make an impact in the world? Then your brain start working for real.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit of a comedy moment for us listening to that, because you called out all of our brains right there, Virginia. When you said that our brains love to answer questions, you're right. I don't think any of us have ever asked a question and then just been like, yeah, no, I'll leave that, like, to be continued. We always want to answer it. So I love that perspective right there. Talk to us about some of those questions within the scope of business, especially, and also obviously tying it into the social impact that you guys love helping businesses achieve. Talk to us about some of those bigger questions. And I also love, you dropped one of my favorite words already in today's session, which is the dichotomy. And we have a tendency to think about things in that way. Share with us, how do we break free of these cages? Because Virginia, that's really what you're alluding to, is is bringing our minds outside of the scope of what we've trained to think like, thinking in a totally different way.
I was just going to say, the starting point, like the big question, the first big question is, and I think this is a question that we're born with, and then systems can kind of, beat it out of us, let's say. And that is, what am I here to do? You could also say, who am I? You look at your identity, and this goes into Virginia's Indomable mindset, Indomable level of consciousness, like understand who you really are. But from a business perspective, the first thing to do is to make the linkage between your mission of your business and your brand. And so the question there is my mission my brand, or is our mission our brand? If it's not, if your brand is around your products or your brand is around some sort of image, it doesn't mean you can't do good work. It just means there's a lot more friction there because you're not coming right out and saying what you believe. So one of the things that we do with our clients is we help them articulate this sort of core philosophy. We would call it like a brand philosophy, but it's rooted in their mission. And the second question, and I would love to hear your answer on this too. The second question from a business aspect is not who am I looking for? It's who is looking for me. That's who your audience is. And we know this ancient principle, when the student is willing, the teacher appears. So when I would modify that to say, when the called are ready, the brand appears. The someone that you can associate with, and you can build a movement with, and you can build a community with. But if you go out into the marketplace thinking in kind of linear, so let's call it like low conscious masculine, linear, point A to point B, like using the word like target market and all of that, is you're going to miss the point that the people that are here for you to meet are looking for you already, but you have to use the right language, because language is the invitation. Language is the beginning. It says in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word. Well, in branding, mission branding, and branding your mission and doing this kind of massive work, the language you use and having questions like, what does my heart want to say? Or what do we really want to say to the world? Those are the type of questions to be able to ask yourself. And you need courage to do that. You need courage to be able to go, oh, I need to say what I really feel, not what I think they want to hear. Because that's not an attractant. That's a useful sales tool, but it's not mission building. It's not movement building.
And one of the comments that we get from our clients during that first initial sessions that we have with them, that is, align your vision with your brand, with your message, with how you want to show up in the world, and what is that you want to make and achieve, is that usually when we ask those questions, and even when we ask ourselves those questions, is who I am, what I want to achieve in the world, what is the impact, what is my legacy, what I'm here for, our brain sends us rehearsed answers. We practice those answers in our head, and we send them, and we share those answers because they're safe. And so part of the process, in that process of really encourage them to be brave and to go beyond that and to say what else, is to challenge them to be, with love and compassion, but to really challenge our clients to say, what your brain is telling you about who you are and what is possible. And then who benefits from you thinking that way? Who benefits from you thinking that small? When we challenge them and said, you think you're thinking big, but what else is possible? How it can be bigger? And many of them freak out. It's like, well, but I'm already thinking out of the box and I'm already thinking big. This is like, I'm thinking the impossible. So keep asking those questions. It's like, who said that? Who said that was impossible? Who benefits from you believing that was impossible, especially that was impossible for you? And that is especially important to ask people of colors, immigrants, for instance, women, people that are, in the minority groups in general. They are the ones that think a lot of things are impossible for them, but somebody, some groups, some system benefit themselves from keeping them believing that. So that's the kind of questions that we ask, and we challenge, and we keep challenging. It's like what your brain is telling you, what your brain wants you to believe, so you stay safe, so you feel safe. And how can you challenge your brain by proving it that you are also safe, but actually safer in yourself, in your core, in your heart, but answering the real question.
Yeah, super powerful stuff in all of that I really want to call out for listeners. The first of which is what, Justin, that question that you shared with us, which again, it made me re-examine the way that I even think about marketing and the way I think about business, which is not to ask who am I looking for as far as my customers go, but who is looking for me. And I'll share with you, just because I know that listeners are going to be going through their own inner dialogue as they're listening to our episode today. And for me, by thinking about who is looking for me, it made me take a step back and say, okay, I'm not doing this podcast for me. I'm doing it for the entrepreneur out there who feels alone. I'm doing it because there are entrepreneurs out there who are saying, gosh, what is the way? I wish I could tap into the brains of so many people who have done extraordinary work. Those are the people looking for me, and more broadly for us. And it's even more encouraging and uplifting to do it for them, because there's a tangible person on the other side looking for us. So I think it's really powerful, and it reframes the way that we approach all the things that we do outwardly and inwardly within our businesses. So I love that. And then Virginia, it's always fun for me. Almost all of my friends are fellow either immigrants firsthand or children of immigrants like myself. And you're right, you're speaking to so many things that play into our mindsets. And for me, the more you share about all of the power of the work that both of you do, is that I keep just thinking, like, the word unshackled. It's like unshackled from what other people have tried to put in us, unshackled from the limits of our own minds, unshackled from whatever our pasts and our histories are. And for me, as the son of an immigrant, it's a very important part of my identity and who I am. Is I always think about my family's story of coming to the US. Like, they paved the way for me. They showed me that anything is possible. They took a huge leap. They fled the mountains of Albania under communist rule to come to the United States in the name of freedom. And that has shaped so much of my beliefs. And it makes me really question, like, am I uncomfortable enough? And I think that you just spoke to some of that safety and security. I'd love for you to go deeper into that, because both of you have worked inside a lot of real life businesses, a lot of real life nonprofits. You both have a lot of professional background and history. And talk to us about that uncomfort. How do we get more or more discomfort? How do we, like, what is it that we lean on, and how do we get out of those comfy confines?
Well, that's part of what we call the indomable mindset. It's really, indomable is a loose word in Spanish that translates into impossible to domesticate. And that means that really you get to a level of consciousness that is not expanding. It's a rising consciousness where nothing and no one, including your own mind, has power over you. And you learn how to decolonize your mind from all those socializing beliefs that we have grew up with and that we think are our own. We think that our thoughts are our own. So to learn to reveal the difference between thought that were learned and appropriated and interiorized versus the thought that we are creating as part of that divine power that we have of creation, of coming up with new things, coming up with new visions, coming up with the unthinkable. I mean, one of the beautiful things that we have in humanity is, like, look around you. Everything you see have been created by the human mind at some point, except nature, of course. But everything else, somebody thought the impossible and challenged themselves to believe that it was possible, and then make it happen, make it real. And so all the things that we think, well, that was already invented, or there is nothing new under the sun, we have an incredible potential, but we have to first challenge our brain and take really control over our brain. Our brain is a magical tool. It's extremely powerful. We don't use even a fraction of it. And when we learn how to put it to our service to create the future that we want to create, then it really can make it come true. But we need to start by, little by little, making a list, kind of a list of all the things that we believe are true, including about ourselves, about humans, about other humans, about our environment, about our country, and start questioning, say, like, how much of this is real and how much is just learn because somebody wants me to believe that, and how can I challenge that? And there are many tools that you can develop and the skills that you can develop to become quickly more skeptic to that kind of things and see beyond that to what's real.
Yeah, I would say also about being uncomfortable, Brian, that it's uncomfortable as a straight white American male. It is uncomfortable to examine how I have benefited from the system. I used to be very uncomfortable with that idea to the point of rejecting meeting, falling in love with, building a business with an immigrant, a Latina, has been very eye-opening.
And a feminist.
Yeah. In many ways, it's been very eye-opening. But also just understanding that although it's uncomfortable, that the people that don't look like me have a different experience. A black or a brown person or a woman or a LGBTQ person, an immigrant, those are all different experiences. And I think that's what makes diversity such a powerful business idea. And you can see that there's all this new hard data that shows that companies that invest in DEI outperform their competition exponentially. The other one is more deep though, Brian, and it's a sensitive thing, but I think, based off of getting to know you a little bit, that you're cool with this, is you have to get uncomfortable by going back and dealing with your own unintegrated trauma. Now, not everybody's experienced trauma in the sense of childhood trauma, but if you have had a traumatic childhood, if you were a victim of violence or a victim of scarcity or abandonment, it's likely, and proper credit to our mutual friend Kelly Campbell for this idea, it's very likely you became an entrepreneur because of your trauma. The issue with that is that trauma leaves a part of you that will always want to play small. And your soul, which cannot be damaged, your soul plays big. It knows no other way. So I know this firsthand as an entrepreneur. For 20 years, I've been an entrepreneur. I worked with thousands of entrepreneurs. And the ones that could go out into the world with integrated trauma is part of their story. What they were able to do was play big, think big, speak big, without that little voice saying, oh, what are you doing? And the whole imposter syndrome and all of that. Not that those aren't real feelings, but they're feelings that come from the trauma. And so when you do that work, and there's all kinds of different ways to do the work of trauma integration, when you do that work, there's a intersection here with your level of consciousness. And I am certain that your level of consciousness and the level of integration work go hand in hand. And Virginia talked about a consciousness rising as opposed to expanding. And the more you go up, the more you'll see. And if you have influence and power, the more you'll have to do. And it's around spiral dynamics, this idea of sort of quantum theory applied to consciousness, that you will move from me to we to everyone. And we work primarily with people that are in between me to we, or in the we move into everyone. But all of it is that they went and they got uncomfortable with their biases. They got uncomfortable by touching their wounds. They got uncomfortable by saying no and setting boundaries and getting rid of the things that no longer serve them, so they could be unencumbered to go out and create beauty in the world.
And I will add to that, I'm talking about discomfort, and I'm talking from a place of being part of many minorities or unprivileged groups. My master coach, Brooke Castillo, used to say something that really resonated with me, is discomfort is the currency for success. And what it means by that is that our capacity, when we manage our mind, we learn how to manage our emotions too. And our capacity to feel our emotions and stop being afraid of any emotion. They said that when you're not afraid of fear, then there's nothing to fear. When you learn how to manage your emotions and sit with them and welcome them, and you are willing to feel the discomfort of certain emotions, because many of us play small because we're afraid of feeling something, feeling humiliation, feeling embarrassment, feeling the judgment of others, feeling being criticized, feeling our own judge inside, the feelings that create the fear, the anxiety, that we stop ourselves from doing amazing stuff just because we are afraid of discomfort. And discomfort is just a feeling. If you learn how to process and manage and welcome and embrace your feeling and understand that that discomfort that you will feel is the currency of achieving the impossible, and you're okay with that, with feeling discomfort, it's not feeling discomfort, it's embracing the discomfort of your emotions, knowing that emotions will not kill you, or they're just uncomfortable, then you can achieve anything.
Yeah, super powerful insights there. I really, really dig so many of the analogies that you both use. And I think what makes the things that you guys talk about so powerful is that I know that every word is deeply intentional. Like, you guys aren't, and Virginia, hearing you talk about the indomitable mindset and how it means, it can't be domesticated. It goes outside of what we've been taught. That's powerful stuff. And behind all of the words that you're both choosing is deep meaning that forces all of us not just to question. The thing that I really like that's overarching in all of this stuff is questioning the outside, but also deeply questioning the inside. And I think that that's where so much, but you're right. It starts with those questions. Question everything. And particularly, I like one of the distinctions that you made was about raising versus expanding. And I'm a visual person, and I call on a lot of life experiences when I try to picture things through lenses. And what I think of is when I moved to Los Angeles. So LA is near and dear to my heart. Listeners know how much I love Los Angeles. It's a city that is surrounded by mountains. And I'll never forget that my first week there, my friend was like, let me show you the best view of LA. And we went up to Griffith Observatory, and I'm looking out and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the best. We're so high up over the city. And I thought that was it. And then when I found a place that was even higher, that gave you an even more visual perspective of the city, now you could see more by raising that level. And if I believed that Griffith Observatory was the highest and best view of LA, I would have never known anything beyond that. So it's a cheesy analogy and perspective that I have, but listeners love that stuff because that is how I think about it. And I think it's a in real life visual of all the concepts that you guys are talking about. Gosh, we're 38 minutes in to this episode, which unfortunately means we're coming towards the end, but I know that there's so much more that all of you could share with our listeners. So I want to talk about where listeners can go to learn more about your business. But before we get there, the one big question that I'd love to ask, and I'm sure both of you will have a very different answer and perspective on this, is with all of this stuff in mind, obviously you've challenged the way that we as entrepreneurs, business leaders think. What's a tangible action? Something that you'd love for listeners to sit down today after hearing this and be like, okay, this is the one thing I need to look at, I need to ask, I need to do in order to start moving forward and start thinking in this way that has been such a joy to hear about from you both today.
Well, I think that a good question would be, what is something I will dream of and I think is not possible for me? And I start there, and then ask yourself, why I think it's not possible? What if it's possible? What if the question is not what is possible, but how can I make it possible? And I think it's a good place to start.
And Brian, I would say a starting point is to do an examination. We practice a lot of axiology in what we do with Massive. Axiology is looking at things intrinsically, extrinsically, and systemically. Basically doing an axiological review of your life and your business, and what you're looking for is inconsistencies. Now, we all fall short, we all do things, we all have a petty side, we all have a dark side, but if you are doing those things in the container of a business, there's a karmic effect to that. And so especially with language, is to go through your website, go through your social media, and look where you're trying to use anything that would be perceived or received as persuasive, manipulative, gaslighting, where you are playing off of people's fears, uncertainties, and doubts in a way that you benefit from, but they don't. And be really honest with yourself about where that language comes in. And then have the courage and the leadership to go in and make those changes. And when you start by changing your language to match your values, the sort of the karmic wheel of momentum starts to kick in at that point. And you combine that with what Virginia said, you've got this sort of inner and outer, the intrinsic aspect of your relationship with your mind and thinking big, and the extrinsic, that your business is a reflection of your values and your mission. And now you get to go out and go be different in the world, which is more of the systemic side of things. But I would say you can go out and make social change. It's usually reform. We have a mutual friend, Orville Morales, who he talks about most people are reactivists, not activists. You can do all that. You can still care about things, and you can still change your, Facebook picture to Ukrainian flag or whatever. You're not really changing anything until you do the intrinsic and extrinsic changes. Then you can go out and create systemic change in the world.
Boom. I love that. And it highlights the fact that we all have room to think differently. We have room to question ourselves and everything that exists around us. I love the differentiation and importance of the intrinsic stuff versus the extrinsic stuff. So much that we dove into today. I know listeners are going to want to see more, because obviously this is just the tip of the iceberg and all the incredible stuff that you both are doing with your company, which I love the name of it. And it's so abundantly clear how it fits in with your line of work. So tell listeners where they can go to learn more about you both and what you're up to with Massive.
Thank you, Brian. It's very simple. Just go to our website, massivechange.co. You can also follow us on social media, LinkedIn in particular. Just look for Massive Systemic Change or Massive Change. And really what we want to do is have conversations. We're not for everyone. We're not a mass advisory firm. We take a very small handful of clients. Our requirement is three things to be a client of ours. One is you have to have a calling. You may not know how to articulate it. You may have rejected it for 20 years, but you have to have a calling. We cannot tell you what your calling is. We can just help you articulate it. Number two is you don't really have to have this, but it really helps in the process to have some sort of active mindfulness or meditation or some sort of self-inquiry, self-coaching practice.
Or any really different kind of consciousness.
Right.
Because some people start with the social consciousness, and that's many activists are, and a lot of people from minorities communities start with social consciousness, and then they raise and they build into the other level of consciousness as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the last thing that we really would want from a client, so when you go to our website and you see our content, you read our stuff, and there's this resonance, and you're like, I need to talk to Virginia and Justin. Please listen to that. And if you don't like it, that's okay too. But is to have long passion. And long passion is an understanding this is not a side project. It's not like a hobby. Making your mission and your brand and your life the same thing is serious work, requires serious commitment, but you have to have long passion for it. Because this type of work, we're not making White Claw here, we're making bourbon. There's a process to this of distillation and purification. And if you don't have that long passion to push through, especially the stuff around how the market and your own people in your own community push back against you, the backlash, if you don't have long passion, that's going to bite you. That's going to bite you in the end, and it's actually going to be a restrictor. So those three things are like the main indicators that you might be ready to talk to us.
Yes, I love that answer and your clarity on your own business and the types of people that are looking for you. It's exactly what you talked about with us here today in practice, in front of our eyes and ears. So I love that perspective. Thank you so much. I know that all of us have a lot of work to do to look inward and outward as far as how we think and how we see ourselves and the world. So thank you both for coming on here today and sharing all of this with us on the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you.